Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar of Vietnam's education sector today, International Education Market Updates, Trends, and Developments. My name is Kate. I'm the Manager of Market Support and Partnership Development here at the BC Council for International Education. Thank you so much for joining us today on what we hope would be an informative session about Vietnam education. And today's webinar is also co-hosted by the Consulate General of Canada in Ho Chi Minh City. Before we get started, it is important that I acknowledge that at BCCIE, we live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish people of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Now move on to a few housekeeping items. Attendees will be muted during the session. There is a chat function for you to provide your comments to the panelists during the session. If you need any technical support, please also communicate with us through the chat function box. My colleague from BCCIE, Gab, is also online today to assist with that. So please feel free to send a chat message to us if you have any issues with Zoom. There is also a closed caption option available on Zoom. So participants who would like to have the closed caption option available can also have that on Zoom. So now without further ado, I would like to invite our first guest speaker today, Ms. Tu Nguyen, Trade Commissioner Education Team Lead from the Consulate General of Canada in Ho Chi Minh City. Over to you, Tu.
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm very glad to be invited to the webinar today. And my name is Tu Nguyen. I'm the Trade Commissioner responsible for the education sector in Vietnam. And it's great that it's the right time that we discuss about the update from the education market in Vietnam. And now I'd like to share my screen so that you can see my presentation. So let's start with the an overview of the Vietnam's education sector. Vietnam is an important market for international education, and it has been ranked in #1 in Southeast Asia and #3 in the world for sending international students to Canada. Vietnam has just moved up from the 5th place to the 3rd place last year, with the number of Vietnamese students in Canada by the end of 2020. 19,000 Vietnamese students studied in Canada last year, and that is almost 300% growth from the year 2015. In terms of market size, Vietnam is a potential market for many study destinations in the world. Around 250,000 Vietnamese students study overseas, and 90% of these students are self-financed students. And one thing to know is that 7 out of 10 of the self-financed students study abroad. They cluster around 5 key countries in descending orders: Japan, South Korea, the US, Australia, and Canada. Speaking of the education system in Vietnam, at the moment, education doesn't meet the demand of the students as well as the industries and employers. So that's why the students are very keen on studying overseas to gain the global perspective, international qualifications, as well as the skills that can be applied in the real work environment. Vietnam is one of the most dynamic and emerging countries in the region. Before the pandemic, the GDP growth rate of Vietnam has been an average of 7%. Vietnam is also one of the fastest middle-class growth nations in the world. By 2020, there were around 33 million middle-class people, and it is forecasted that by 2030, there will be 56 million middle-class people in Vietnam. And according to the World Data Lab, Vietnam, with that number of the middle-class people, Vietnam ranks #7 in the world. Population in Vietnam is around 97 million people, and it is a young country with almost 50% of the people are in the age of 25 or younger. And Vietnam has been considered as an important market for international education for all sectors from K to 12, college to university and language. Let's move next to our key topic of discussion today. How is the education context in Vietnam during the current stage of COVID-19? So let's talk about the current situation of COVID-19. So starting from late April until the end of September, Vietnam has been facing the fourth outbreak of the pandemic, and it was the most severe one, even though it's still the number of cases are still there, and the most severe period has been over. We're still in the stage that we are slowly reopening of the economy, and the government is expecting the economy to open gradually, but not too fast, because they consider that there's a lot of cases in the community and in many areas. So in the last third quarter, from April until September, there have been lockdown and restrictions on mobility. So that also lead to significant decline of the economy in Vietnam, and the growth rate of the economy has been forecasted at 2 to 2.5% only. So that is the very low rate for an economy like Vietnam. And in terms of opening the economy, the Vietnamese government is looking at the different level of risk assessment throughout 63 provinces and cities across the country. So they have classified into 4 different zones. So green zone would be have the low risk, medium yellow zone is medium risk, and orange for high risk, and red for very high risk area. So right now, both Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City are classified as as yellow zone. But one thing to note is that just 2 days ago, Hanoi was still in green zone. That means it's pretty low risk in the country. But now there are new community cases in the city, so it has been changed the color. In terms of vaccination rate in Vietnam, that has improved a lot over the past 4 months. And right now, over 50% of the Vietnamese people above 18 got at least 1 dose of vaccines. And for Ho Chi Minh City, around 80% of the population are fully vaccinated. And for Hanoi, 65%. And vaccination has also been rolled out for students from age 12 to 17 in late October. Ho Chi Minh City was the first city in the country to get vaccines for the students, because it has been hard hit by the pandemic. So let's move on to the next slide. How COVID-19 has impacted education in Vietnam and how the sector has been responding. So in the academic 2020 and 2021, there was some short periods of campus closure because the situation was not so severe in Vietnam last year. However, for academic year 2021 and 2022, the students have to start studying online for the first semester. And the first semester in Vietnam starts in late August or September, depending on each city. And it is planned that the schools or the students will return to in-person study for the second semester starting in January, if the situation can be controlled and that if the students are fully vaccinated. However, in some green zone areas, like in some suburban districts of Hanoi and some areas in southern Vietnam, schools are able to resume to in-person learning in early November. The fourth wave of the pandemic had impact to the entrance exam to grade 10 in Ho Chi Minh City, as well as to the National High School Graduation Exam. So for the high school graduation exam, only a number of students were able to take in the exam in the first batch. And for the second batch, it was canceled in many cities, including Ho Chi Minh. And for those that couldn't sit in the second batch of the exam, they were assessed for admission for graduation and then for admission to universities in the country via different options, including option one, like through the results of the graduation exam, or option two, via the transcripts for their high school studies. And option three is based on the the Vietnam National University standardized test that was that took place before the high school graduation exam. And because of COVID-19, education in Vietnam has been shifted to online, and the students have becoming more familiar with online study. And even though they do not like that, but they are forced to be familiar with this new learning model. However, there is this inconsistency across the country. Many students don't have the digital devices to study. Students and teachers in many places do not have the adequate IT skills to support them in online study. Training capacity of teachers for online model is also limited in some areas, especially in the public school system and in remote areas. And COVID-19 has left a lot of impact to the economy as well as to the education sector in Vietnam. Many schools, especially private schools and language centers, were forced out of the business. They had to close the door because the students were not allowed to study at kindergartens during the outbreak of COVID. And it also affected a number of Vietnamese students who attend private and international schools where the tuition fees are quite high for Vietnamese people. So because of the reduced income by some families in Vietnam, so many students were impacted by that. And because of the economic impact across the country, especially in Ho Chi Minh City, the Ho Chi Minh City government has decided to waive the tuition fees for the students at public schools, at least for the first semester. And they also encourage non-public schools to reduce the tuition fees to support families that may be impacted by COVID-19. Let's move next to the international education market in Vietnam in the age of COVID-19. So we have seen the picture from gloomy to rosy over the past few months. Of course, COVID-19 had great impact to international education sector. It impacted the study plan of many Vietnamese students who have been so eager to study abroad. So the number of international students from Vietnam to study in Canada and abroad generally declined over the past 18 months. We also noticed that the education agent network in Vietnam was impacted a lot. Many companies had to close the door or they have to scale down their business to survive during the COVID-19 period. There was temporary pause on sending abroad government-funded delegations for professional development or short-term training. However, we started to see upward trend for overseas study, I mean long-term studies from fall 2021. Student recruitment, even though it has switched to online again since May 2021, we noticed that the activities to promote international education has been more vigorous since July up to now. And we see that almost every weekend, we see activities on seminars or mini fairs to promote international education to the Vietnamese students and their parents. Long-term overseas training by the government-funded programs also reactivated recently. And we also noticed that discussions on international partnerships started to become more active in this year. And let's discuss about the market trends for overseas studies. So we see that there's still strong interest in overseas studies among Vietnamese students. They're willing to go if they can study on campus or if they transfer to in-person training after that. We also noticed that the new key driving factors for overseas studies among Vietnamese students include these factors. First of all, safety, pandemic containment by the host country, visa policies, support to international students, as well as the mode of delivery of their programs. Canada has emerged as a top destination during and post-pandemic, thanks to its numerous competitive advantages compared to its competitors. These include strong brand, positive perception, border reopening, high vaccination rate, welcoming environment, cost of studies and living, post-graduation work permit, and immigration opportunities for international students. And it is forecasted that international education market will recover in 2022. And let's move on to the current trends for Vietnam education sector. At higher education level, we have noticed that many specified training universities or specialized training universities, which have been focusing on some specific programs, will be transformed into multidisciplinary universities. That means they will be opening more new programs. We also noticed that there's an increased opening of health science, pharmacy, medical programs at local higher education institutions in Vietnam due to the increased demand for treatment of patients in the country and the lack of professional people that work in this industry. And next, we see that more and more higher education institutions in Vietnam got its autonomy and aim forward to internationalization. And internationalization will happen in many areas, including curriculum, in training, among students, lecturers, international cooperation, as well as quality standard and brand recognition and ranking. So these are all the areas that Vietnamese higher education institutions want to focus on moving forward. And that is an important area that they will work on in their business strategy in the next coming years. We also noticed that local higher education in Vietnam, they want to increase capacity at their institutions, and they will be willing to invest more in capacity building in the coming years. And because of these changes, we are seeing that there are increased opportunities for institutional partnerships with international partners. So these opportunities will be present in a number of areas. First of all, that would be in transnational program delivery. For example, 4+0 program, or 2+2, 3+1, or 3+2 with their international partners. Articulation agreements is another area of student and faculty mobility, as well as development and licensing of curriculum. Like I mentioned earlier, because many Vietnamese universities want to develop new programs, so they really look for potential partners that have expertise in helping them to build new programs to provide at their current institutions. And of course, research collaboration is an area that local higher education institutions in Vietnam would want to focus on. And lastly, linkages with the industry. For the K-12 sector, we also noticed that private schools in Vietnam are more interested in online programs, and they are willing to work with their international partners to provide online programs as add-on values for their students, and they are open to diversifying international partners. So what are the recommendations for market development for Canadian institutions? Let's talk about recruitment first. So be visible and take the long view. That means we encourage Canadian institutions to be committed to the market and have a long-term strategy. Offer appealing package. That means that will include location, brand recognition, scholarships opportunities, cost, as well as career prospect for international students after they graduate. During this age, virtual platforms and digital marketing are the key two marketing channels that we would encourage Canadian institutions to leverage to reach out to potential students and their parents. Using in-country representatives or agents would be another marketing strategy that Canadian institutions can consider. And providing regular updates to agents, school counselors, as well as to the students and their parents are important during these days. Alumni and Vietnamese community in Canada are important key influencers for Canadian institutions that want to attract and promote more Vietnamese students to come to study. And partnering with local higher education institutions is another channel because they want to support, the local higher education institutions in Vietnam. They want to develop more articulation programs and joint programs with international partners. So this is an area that Canadian institutions can consider. Next, promoting the value proposition of your respective province or area as a study destination. That means when the students decide on a program or an area to study, they will look at an overall picture, what the students will be able to get if they come to study at that institution or that program in a particular place, whether there will be opportunities for careers after they graduate or not. So these are some examples for what you can think of to include in your promotion package. And finally, think about scholarships or financial support to needs-based students. And we know that Canadian institutions, sometimes they cannot offer generous scholarships to international students. But if in that case, marketing scholarships, something that is, even though it's small, but it's still very encouraging for Vietnamese students when they look at programs and institutions in Canada to study and make their decision. One thing to keep in mind is that during pandemic and post-pandemic, there are also many overseas study options for international students, including Vietnamese students. As many countries also offer similar work and immigration opportunities, affordable tuition fees and living costs for students, as well as scholarships for Vietnamese students. For example, the US, they often grant a lot of scholarships on merit base, and if the students get the scholarships, that will help a lot in reduce the cost of them of studying in the US. Or if they choose to study in remote areas in the US or in some other countries, the cost of living is very competitive as well. Move on to strategies for partnerships. We will encourage Canadian institutions to be active, reaching out to Vietnamese institutions. And the Vietnamese institutions, they are also very welcoming to Canadian institutions that reach out to them to discuss about potential partnerships. Develop mutually beneficial relationships to open up more opportunities in recruitment as well as other areas for potential collaboration. So that means Vietnamese institutions expect two-way collaboration. That means they receive students from Canada or they send out students from the institutions to Canada, or that can be collaboration that will be win-win for both sides. And even though Canadian institutions do not start with something big, they can start with something small. Small size activities like organizing seminars or activities on student exchange that can be considered as a partnership between the two institutions, and that will help build the reputation as well as the goodwill from the Vietnamese institutions in the long term. We encourage Canadian institutions to leverage a number of scholarship programs to establish partnerships with their counterparts in Vietnam. I will discuss about the seed scholarships and Project 89 in the next slides. And lastly, please leverage the in-market trade commissioners for support on market intelligence, potential leads, contact information of local potential partners in Vietnam. So what is seed scholarship? So this is the Canadian ASEAN scholarships and educational exchanges for development. It is supporting ASEAN students to be able to study or do research in Canada, and that will require the agreements between Canadian institutions and their counterparts in ASEAN country to receive ASEAN students to Canada. And that means the students will be waived tuition fees to study in Canada, and Global Affairs Canada will provide funding to cover their accommodation, their living costs, and air tickets to Canada and back to Vietnam after they finish their programs. One thing to know is that Vietnam now has the highest number of recipients of seed scholarships among ASEAN countries. 74 Vietnamese students were awarded the scholarships out of a total of over 200 scholarships granted to ASEAN nations. Let's talk about Project 89. The objective of the project is to enhance competencies of lecturers and administrators of higher education institutions in the country. Timeline is from 2019 to 2030. And there are three different forms of training. The first one is fully abroad. Second one, fully domestic. And the third option is joint programs. And this option is available at the PhD level only. For programs that the students can study at PhD level, this is open to all programs as long as the candidates from Vietnam have an interest in study, and that is in the strategy for development of their institutions. For master level, this focus only on culture, arts, physical education, and sports programs. And how to participate in Project 89? The first thing is that Canadian institutions need to be enlisted in the approved list by the Ministry of Education and Training. That means they need to offer programs in the top 500 according to the international rankings that have been published by MOET. They also need to leverage the existing partnerships with Vietnamese higher education institutions because the candidates, they normally choose the programs, the institutions that they know about. So what is the best way for their lecturers and administrators at the universities in Vietnam to know about Canadian institutions? So their home universities, if they have existing partnerships with Canadian universities, they will be able to promote the programs better to their potential candidates. And the most important thing is that the Vietnamese higher education institutions, they will need to submit proposals to MOET for funding approval. And this will apply for both overseas training as well as domestic training. When I talk about domestic training, that can be fully domestic or that will be choice programs. That means for PhD levels, if it takes place between 4 to 5 years, the Vietnamese universities, they are very interested in developing choice training programs with their international partners, whereas the students can complete like 2 years in Vietnam and then they will transfer to overseas universities to complete their degree. So they need to set up such a training model that will be considered as feasible and will be approved by MOET so that they can move forward. So we'd like to share a bit about what the Trade Commissioner Service does in Vietnam. We focus on 2 areas. The first one is education promotion. Before, until 2019, the Trade Commissioner Service in Vietnam has been organizing the Canada Fest. However, starting from 2019, we stopped organizing Canada Fest and we have shifted our strategy to participating in third-party fairs and info sections. For example, we have been attending a number of events hosted by CEI or IGP or IRA in the past few months. And we also work on social media. Both the embassy and the consulate of Canada in Vietnam, we have an active Facebook pages. So just in the summer, in July, we organized the first Chat with Alumni online talk shows, and that was the first interactive and online event on Facebook that we have ever hosted, and that has been very effective in attracting Vietnamese students and their parents to follow. The second pillar of our activities in Vietnam is partnership facilitation. So we have been organizing a number of activities to facilitate collaboration between Canadian institutions and their counterparts in Vietnam. So we organized the partnership workshop in 2018, and then we did the partnership survey to collect information on both sides to support potential collaboration. And in 2019, we hosted the first Canada-Vietnam collaboration in aviation training seminars. And next month, we'll be hosting the first virtual Canada-Vietnam education collaboration and networking event. And this event is to promote collaboration between the 2 countries, not only in recruitment, but also on partnerships. And throughout the year, the TCS has been doing a number of outreach activities to the local education institutions and the industries to explore opportunities for Canadian institutions. And what support that we will provide to Canadian institutions, we provide market intelligence, qualified contacts at the government, at the institutions, agents, and service providers. We also organize and support B2B activities, site visits for incoming business delegations. And we have been working very closely with our colleagues from IRCC and development programs in our marketing initiative in the country. And lastly, and that's the end of my presentation. And this is the list of the education team in Vietnam. So we have myself, and we have another colleague called Taman. She's based in Hanoi, and we have Kim Long based at the consulate in Ho Chi Minh City. And thank you so much for your listening.
Thank you so much too for a very comprehensive presentation on the international education sector in Vietnam. Now I'm going to invite Pascal from IRCC to start her presentation.
Good evening, everyone. I'll just share my screen quickly. So my name is Pascal. I just arrived in Vietnam as the new Deputy Program Manager for IRCC Ho Chi Minh. Thank you, Kate and BCCIE for organizing this event. My presentation will be short as I'm not going to go over how to apply for a study permit, but rather focus on information regarding processing study permits while the pandemic is still ongoing, and an update on the travel restrictions and exemption. Until further notice, applications must be submitted online. There are no changes to the requirements to obtain a study permit, whether through the regular process or through the student direct stream. On our website, you can find the general checklist for study permits, but also the checklist specific for our visa office, which outlines other documents required for applicants applying from Vietnam. Some of these documents are a study plan, school transcripts, and a police certificate for applicants 18 years old and older. For proof of funds, the checklist gives examples of possible documents to support the financial aspect of the application. The visa application centers in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City are open to provide biometrics and submit passports. Most panel physicians are now open for upfront medicals or medicals after our request. And since Vietnam just came out of a strict lockdown, we understand that clients were not able to comply with our request in time or provide biometrics within 30 days, for example. So we are being very flexible and granting extensions upon request, or giving additional time for applicants to fulfill these requests. It's very important to mention that before traveling, students need to make sure that their medical results are still valid. If not, they will not be able to board their flight. So if their medicals are expired, they can do an upfront medical and send us the information. Usually the medical results are valid from 1 year from the initial examination date. So capacity was temporarily reduced in the past few months because of the COVID situation in Vietnam, but processing is still continuing for all study permit applications. Global processing times for study permits are 15 weeks currently. Our office, however, currently processes the applications faster than this. It is crucial, though, to submit an application as soon as possible to be able to start the studies on time. It's also important to submit a complete application to avoid delays. For the student direct stream, the processing times remain 20 calendar days for most applications. As you can see with the figures on the slide, the number of applications drastically for obvious reasons. This is applications processed by IRCC for Vietnam. So these numbers are for Vietnamese nationals. So for example, if a Vietnamese citizen lives outside of Vietnam, they would be counted in this number. Even though things seems to be opening up, travel to Canada is still restricted. International students are exempted from the travel restrictions if they hold a valid study permit, have a letter of introduction which shows they are approved for a study permit, and they intend to live in Canada. Meaning that they have to come for a non-discretionary reason. For example, if a student decides to go to Canada for a week to look for an apartment and then come back to Vietnam, this would be considered non-essential. Travel more than 30 days before the start of class is also considered discretionary. The student also needs to attend a designated learning institution with a COVID-19 readiness plan approved by its province or territory. Currently, British Columbia has 190 post-secondary approved designated learning institutions, and all of the secondary and the primary schools are also approved. A recent change to the travel restrictions is the exemption for fully vaccinated traveler. To be considered fully vaccinated, someone needs 2 doses of an approved vaccine or 1 dose of the J&J vaccine. The second dose needs to be administered at least 14 days prior to the date of entry into Canada. These travelers are exempted from quarantine, although they should still have a plan in case they don't qualify as fully vaccinated. For unvaccinated students, they have to complete a 14-day quarantine. At the border, the officials will make sure the reason for travel is non-discretionary and that the student can complete the 14-day quarantine before attending classes, or that they can study online during their quarantine. Spouses, common law partners, and children accompanying a student for most of the duration of studies, so not just for a short visit, do not need a travel authorization letter if they travel at the same time. For parents or caretakers, they can travel without a written authorization if they are traveling with a primary or secondary student or a post-secondary student with a disability or medical condition. In both these cases, only one person can accompany the student. If the family member joins the student in Canada after the student is already there, they'll need a travel authorization letter. We also highly recommend that families apply together. It eases the process, and it facilitates processing to make sure everybody has the proper documents. For more information, visit our website at canada.ca/immigration. For the latest updates on travel restrictions, visit travel.gc.ca/travel-COVID. On this website, you'll find a travel wizard to help navigate all these restrictions. By answering a few questions, you can find out if you are likely to be allowed to enter Canada according to the situation you're in. Also follow us on social media, and for more information, you can contact IRCC Ho Chi Minh by writing to hochiimmigration@international.gc.ca. In the subject line, please include BCCIE so we know you were a participant in this event. I want to thank all the attendees and BCCIE for organizing. Thank you very much.